if you go to chapel on Thursday, it's the students Q&A. You really should go. This is a happening that you don't want to miss. I may even be part of it, so there are always surprises. It's always just real. It's always a lot of fun, and you just won't believe your eyes. So you really need to go on Thursday. You'll find out stuff you didn't even want to know. He does give stuff away, but as Jimmy said today in chapel, the questions are supposed to be about stuff, not for stuff. But there's a little bit of both. It's a lot more fun than the faculty Q&A, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, so
We should.
he is willing to answer your questions, but he has a PowerPoint which I wasn't expecting, so this is good. Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, we're really trying to tamp down Ask the President. It's gotten out of control. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and Ask the President meant ask, about why do we have a curfew? When are we going to build a new music building? One of this year's questions, if you can imagine that. And, but somewhere the showbiz kind of crept in, and it got to where it became more and more asking for stuff instead of asking about stuff. That's the point I was making in chapel. So we're really trying to get it back on track. These questions, we usually have 300 or 400 questions that come in. Believe it or not, we do read all of them. We certainly don't read them all in chapel. I will go into the session with 100. We've been working for days, kind of beating the list down. I turned to Kyle because Kyle's my assistant, and he's been a part of this process the last few days. And what we've done is we just said we're not going to do any personal gimmicks. This way, of course, to eliminate undesired behaviors, to not reward it. And we know that. I mean, I'm an old Skinnerian from way back, but still it's fun. Kids like to have fun, and so they've got to where they artfully ask for cute things, and we've fed that beast, and we're trying to now kill it, and we're trying to get it back down to where we answer serious questions about serious things, information, not showbiz. So we'll see. One female student was pretty clever. She said, you told us in chapel not to ask for stuff, but rather to ask about stuff. So I will respect that, and I would like to ask about the possibility of your giving me a puppy. Okay, that's nice. She outmaneuvered me linguistically. So anyway, that's Thursday. I'm always so glad when it's over. I hate it. I really do. I hate that chapel. I do. And as a result, another way we've tried to kill it is we did not do it last year. We thought, the half-life of a student memory is so short. And if you take a big old freshman class, and they've never seen this before, so they don't know to expect this sort of snap, crackle, and pop. And so we did not do it last year, and we just put it off. And when we were asked about it, we just said, we haven't set a date yet. And we went all year and didn't do it. So we've had this hiccup now. And we think with the combination of the hiccup and a little discipline, we'll get back on course. And we don't want to. It has been a wonderful chapel because they do ask serious things. The problem is they ask very serious things, and it's a great opportunity. And so the most serious issues facing our campus have been asked in the last 2 weeks as they've sent these things in. Questions about LGBT issues, for example. Is that the appropriate place to try to get into an extremely serious subject? Well, probably not. But what if you're trying to normalize any conversation, then that's a great place to lob in some tangential point. The whole origins of life thing is back on the agenda as it usually is. What is it? What do we believe, or what is it okay to believe? My shoe's coming untied here about creation and all that stuff. Creation, evolution. I think maybe the Bryan College situation has put that back on on the table for some students. So questions having to do with those kinds of issues. Chapel, invariably, this is when students ask about how we conduct chapel. The whole question of what is it, are we Pentecostal or not? And this get asked from both directions, of course, from those who are saying, I thought this was a Pentecostal school. It doesn't feel very Pentecostal to me. Are we? And then the other direction that says, what does it mean to be Pentecostal? Are we or aren't we? And if we are, what does that mean? And if we're not, why aren't we? And students don't ask that with the kind of finesse that faculty members ask questions. So one of tomorrow's questions, which I think we're going to read this one just as is. I'm looking over to Kyle because we've been editing some of these questions down and throwing a bunch of them out and trying to decide what to answer. One question says, don't you believe in the moving of the Holy Spirit? Because if you do, why do you always cut chapel off at a certain time? Not a lot of finesse there, but that gets right to it, doesn't it? I think I'll answer that question. Yes, I do believe in the moving of the Holy Spirit. No, it doesn't happen very often. That's why we call it a miracle. A miracle is because it's a rarely occurring event. Anyway, I won't get into it exactly that way. But do I believe in divine healing? Yes, but I go to the doctor when I'm sick. Okay, well, anyway, we'll get to that. We talked at the beginning of the year, and we talked about all kinds of things. And this is where Kyle tells me we stopped. Kyle actually put a little ticker and said that we got to these distinguishing commitments, and then I didn't talk about them. We didn't get that far. I thought I might just pick up there and talk about them. I'd really rather answer your questions, but I'm not sure you'll ask them. What do you want me to do? To make this speech or answer your questions? Or will you even ask a question about that?
Why don't you make the speech and you'll ask questions as you go?
Okay, Carolyn. Got it. All right, I'll do it. You don't mind if I call Carolyn, do you? I was criticized twice in the same semester early in her career, once for calling her Carolyn and once for calling her Dr. Dirksen. That's two different people, thank goodness. And this was in faculty meetings. This was an earlier period. The person who complained about my calling her Carolyn didn't think was taking her seriously enough, and thought maybe if she were a man, I would call her Dr. Dirksen. The person who complained or observed or commented about my calling her Dr. Dirksen thought I was distancing her and I was being sort of official in a kind of very faintly patronizing way. That I called Ollie, that was her predecessor, Ollie Lee, so calling her Dr. Dirksen meant she wasn't in the inner circle. She wasn't one of the guys, So I was marginalizing her in a certain way by calling her Dr. Dirksen, or I was some way diminishing her by calling her Carolyn. So I never knew her middle name. But I'm much more natural calling her Carolyn. As I think I told you in the first session, she and I have been at this since we were both much too young to know what we were doing or why, or certainly where it would all lead. And here we find ourselves many years later having worked together for all these years in a lot of different ways and loving what we're doing. And I know I can speak for her more deeply than ever. And loving one another in the way that you sometimes do in shared work. And so it was pretty hard when she was the vice president for academics for people to crack that, you know. It's like the Paul and Carolyn team was a little hard to penetrate, I think. Because it was so well known that if she and I agreed on something having to do with academics, that's the way it was going to be. And that's what I mean by it's hard to crack that or to penetrate that. So I love working with her, and I think her decision to do this kind of work instead of being the chief academics officer was, in retrospect, a great decision. Because she's really made this into something that it never has been before and something that it needed to be. Let me talk about our characteristics. This first thing is this first commitment. We're committed to the Lordship of Christ and the leadership of the Holy Spirit. I pulled out some notes that I made recently when someone whom I really respect in higher ed, but who's not a believer, asked me in a situation like a dinner table situation in which you can't really dodge, you can't hide behind the speech, what exactly do you mean by Christ-centered? Because we use Christ-centered, 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 mostly the people that know what we mean by Christ-centered, and we mean it, we use it to separate ourselves slightly from those who simply say Christian, not Christ-centered, or church-related, not Christ-centered. But when you get totally outside the neighborhood, of course, people who are uninterested in these really finely tuned nuances, the whole thing of being a Christ-centered institution, these are people who do wonderful work in secular settings, and they don't find it necessary to have a God part of their lives in order to stay motivated to do good work. What do you mean by being Christ-centered and Spirit-led? It led me to jot down some notes, and you know, I was looking at these this week. Let me just read these notes. What do we mean by Christ-centered? And here are my notes. That God is real, that He intervenes in our sphere, that He expresses Himself through Jesus Christ, and that the presence of Christ is personal and pervasive, and so it provides the ground from which everything else grows in our lives. So it comes to matter more than anything else to us. And we wish that for our students. That's what I mean by Christ-centered. So if you don't share an understanding or a belief in the Godhood of Christ, then that doesn't make much sense to you. But if you do, then it does. But it becomes one of those things that requires this kind of radical leap of faith. And this person had said, well, what about the Spirit-led? And this is an individual who, you know, here's the word Pentecostal used, but not sure at all what it means. It's just sort of a tribal distinction among Christians. Here's what I jotted down. These were kind of notes to myself, trying to clarify this before I talk with him again. That there is a Holy Spirit that illuminates this life with Christ that we have. And we as individuals can open ourselves to that to a greater or lesser degree, and that's within our control. That we can experience Christ at a lot of levels, but that if we wish to, we can open ourselves to a greater degree to the intervention of Christ in our lives. And what we mean by being Spirit-led is that we are seeking that greater openness. Some people use the word Pentecostal to identify a certain history, or they use the word charismatic, usually to identify a certain worship style. So, is Lee Pentecostal? My answer is yes. If by that you mean we have historical roots in a Pentecostal church, and we're comfortable with the practices of that church. The complication of embracing that word or that language, Pentecostal or charismatic, is that we have little control over the loading of the phrase to various people, not just in the media, not just people with negative personal experiences from their earlier history, not just to those whose sense of what that means comes from television, but even for those within our own tradition who sadly invest in it, the Pentecostal tradition, things beyond Scripture, and who have elevated it beyond being just a natural aspect of New Testament Christianity into an ism, so that it, the Pentecostal part, becomes more important than the thing itself, the Christ-centeredness, which I think is part of the tragedy of the Pentecostal movement and of the charismatic expression of the Pentecostal movement, is that too often people, out of a reverence for that tradition historically or biblically, have elevated that aspect of Christ-centeredness into a bigger thing than the thing itself. So I think that being Christ-centered, when we're talking about what our commitments are here, I only remember having 7 of these commitments, by the way. Carolyn, in an email to me, referred to 8 commitments. I said to my staff today, could you please find me the 8th commitment? And they couldn't find it anywhere, and we just concluded, Carolyn, you're committed to more stuff than I am. 7 or 8?
I have 8. That's the email.
Jeez, I can't wait to figure. I can't wait to hear what I left out.
I'm sure there's some feminism.
Hang on to that. I need it. I'm reminded of this. I'm reminded of a story that Alan Dershowitz tells, which I love this story. He tells it in one of his several wonderful books. Alan Dershowitz, as you know, is the member of the faculty of Harvard Law School and very famous trial lawyer who's defended lots of bad people, and he's kind of a character, and he's a sort of a celebrity lawyer, but in the best way. And he grew up in Brooklyn in a devoutly and intensely Jewish home, and he describes his family and his mother particularly being so Jewish, so committed to being Jewish, and having such a sense of being Jewish in America as being other, that she just kind of throbbed with this, and he has his wonderful, wonderful memories of his mom and reveres his mom. As a matter of fact, he describes his mom in a way that reminds me so much of my mother. But he said the frame through which his mother viewed everything was, is it good for the Jews? That was her question about everything. She could decide what she loved, what she hated, who she liked, who she didn't like, who to vote for, who not to vote for, what to buy, where to shop, all based on the question, is it good for the Jews? And he tells the story that he and his brothers and his dad were listening to a baseball game on the radio one day, and his mother's in the kitchen. Isn't this a prototypical Jewish mother picture? And she's in there washing dishes or whatever, and they're in there listening to the baseball game, and somebody hits a home run, and it was an explosive sound, and all the guys erupt, and they're cheering and jumping up and down, and she sticks her head in and says, what happened? And they said, Bobby Walker just hit a home run. And she said, well, is it good for the Jews? I love that story because I think a Christ-centered college ought to sort of have that kind of simple way of looking at things. Is it good for the Christ-centeredness of this place? Ultimately, does it achieve that spiritual mission? Is it good for our students' desire and ability to live lives of Christ-centered excellence? That's our version of is it good for the Jews? For my mother, it would have been, is it good for the Church of God? For Alan Dershowitz's mother, is it good for the Jews? For me, is it good for Lee? I look at everything through the filter of it's good. Local politics, state politics, public policy nationally, everything. Is it good for Lee? But what I mean when I say is it good for Lee, I mean is it good for this part of Lee? Because honestly, any development at Lee that drags us off this plumb line, I'm against. Because I think within this mission of Christ-centeredness, of Christ-centered excellence as the goal for our students, there's so much room for us to grow and experience and achieve and accomplishment. It will take many lifetimes for us to exhaust that possibility. So the less we deviate, the better we are. I don't need us to accomplish in tangential ways to this mission. If you ask me what has surprised me most in my 40 plus years of working at Lee, at this stage, it would be this, that it takes so long to do something significant. Because I'm coming to realize it takes more than one lifetime. And I'm cool with that. I'm happy with that. But when I talk about Carolyn and I being engaged in this work together literally since the early 1970s, 1970, 71. So we will reach a point, she and I, in which we will have each of us will have exhausted one lifetime in pursuit of this very narrow goal, to make Lee into the best Christ-centered university possible, and to make it matter in the lives of as many students as possible. And so I think everything else serves that commitment. And so I think what we are realizing is that, okay, now at some point it's the relay race, not the marathon. So, it's that old analogy. You've heard that before. If you haven't, stick around, you'll hear it again. It's not a sprint, but it's also not even a marathon, because there's not a finish line at which there is final accomplishment. It's a relay race, and then you take that baton you've been running with for all those years, and you look for the hand into which to put it. And the question that I got asked in last year's as the president faculty version was, are you grooming somebody to take your place? And my answer, quite honestly, was no. What would I possibly know about that? My job is I'm not the coach, I'm just the runner. And my job is not to choose the next runner. My job is just to run hard and be ready to hand the baton off at the right time. And I think generationally, that's kind of what's happening at Lee. And that's why faculty building becomes more important than ever. Okay. So we're committed to the Lordship of Christ and the leadership of the Holy Spirit. It's the question, well, are you Pentecostal? Well, yes, of course. But if you think that being Pentecostal is all about whether or not one speaks in tongues or how loudly one worships, then you don't understand being Pentecostal the way I do. We think there are alternative ways, legitimate alternative ways to experience and express a commitment to the leadership of the Holy Spirit. That's what it means to be Pentecostal. We call it Pentecostal because on the day of Pentecost, there was this sort of radical openness to change on the part of couple of hundred Christ followers. The fact that they spoke in tongues on that occasion ought not be an absolutely defining characteristic of the whole experience with God. Wouldn't seem. Okay. We're committed to undergraduate education. Now I say that looking about half of you are nursing faculty, and you know we're headed straight for a master's program in nursing as soon as we can get there. But so we do believe in the occasional graduate program here and there, but not in the arts and sciences. You know, my bias is that master's degrees in history are best, most of the time under most circumstances, best offered in places where there are PhD programs in history and where the master's degree is kind of the trailing edge of the doctorate in most of the liberal arts areas. But it's in the more professional areas that master's degrees or graduate degrees become necessary and important for schools like ours. And so look at where we have our master's degrees. Our latest one is the MBA, and we have all the master's degrees in education, and we have the master's degrees in counseling and family therapy and in music and in religion. We really don't have any liberal arts master's degrees unless you would regard the MA in theology. That might be regarded as an MA and a master's degree in the liberal arts. What's missing is no master's degrees in English, even though we have a wonderful English program, or in history, even though, you know, students flock to our history major, relatively speaking, or in biology, or in French, or even in psychology, some of those areas that are big, but over in the professional end of psychology. So I think undergraduate training is our thing. This might change, you know, this might change. And Lee might evolve into a school that has an equal commitment to graduate studies, but I don't regard us as having an equal commitment to graduate studies. When I first introduced the first graduate degree at Lee to the board, a certain amount of resistance to it, because I had preached this thing of we're a teaching institution, we're about undergraduate education so much that I'd kind of oversold that, yeah, I guess. And then when we offered our first master's degree, I was reminded of that, and about the tail wagging the dog, and you know, and of course being taught by TAs, and you know that whole side of university life that we've all experienced. We don't want to be that. We want to be this fine, small liberal arts teaching institution where the leading faculty teach ground level undergraduate courses. They don't stay in the research work and farm out the teaching to the graduate assistants. That was the point that I was making. I said at that time, and it's kind of stuck, well, I envision, they want to know how big do you envision this getting? I said, I don't ever envision us having more than 10% of our students as graduate students. As long as we have a school that 90% of our students are undergraduates, that's okay, isn't it? And they said, yeah, that's okay. And that's right about where we are. We have about 4,000 traditional undergraduates and about 400 traditional graduate students, or something like that, maybe a little down from that. Maybe, you know, 3,800 and 350 or something like that right now. Our commitment is to undergraduate education. I think that's still where our commitment is. So what about that? Why do we add the MBA? Well, you know, it's 20 to 25 students in each of 2 cohorts for 2 years, and so it's something that doesn't in any way, the question is, does it serve the undergraduate major? You know, in my opinion, the president of the graduate program should serve the undergraduate major, not the other way around. And I think we've accomplished that here at Lee. And I really believe if you go to the hooding ceremony every year or every commencement, you'll hear me say, we started graduate programs to serve students, but what we've learned is the presence of these graduate students really enriches our life here. I say that at every hooding ceremony, and I really mean it, and I see it all the time. And you know, if you should be fortunate enough to have scheduled your life in such a way as to go to hear our symphony play tonight at 7:30, how's that for a shameless plug? and you know these people up there playing, you'll know what I'm talking about. You know, they're playing Simon and Garfunkel tonight. How hard could that be? I mean, geez, if you can't just lay back and relax, enjoy a little Simon and G, then you're wired too tight. So they're doing a Pops concert, and it'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it, actually. But you look up there and you'll see the occasional grad student playing one of those instruments, and you realize how enriching that is to the undergraduate student. You've got a little more maturity, a little, you know, and it's a kind of a natural peer leadership, and you see that in every area all the way around campus. Graduate students enrich our lives, and but what we're about is the undergraduate experience. We're committed to classroom teaching. That's very similar to that. I understand the role of scholarship in the well-rounded life of the professor. We value it, we applaud it, we don't reward it much, but we try to facilitate it. And we understand that increasingly research for undergraduates is considered a necessary part of the undergraduate experience. That increasingly students, when they apply for grad schools or professional schools, are expected to have done research already, or certainly have a leg up if they have. We understand that to lead students, undergraduates in research, good research, you have to be involved too yourself. We understand that to stay up with your discipline, you requires constant retraining and constant interaction with the discipline. So we're not anti-research. We just we try to be honest with new faculty and say our primary commitment is to teaching over research, and we do not value them equally. I think I'm being as honest and fair as possible when I say that. So do we want the theology prof to go write a paper about some area of his or her scholarship that's important and highly technical and will advance the reputation of that faculty member in the discipline of theology? Of course. Will we provide release time from occasionally to make that easier? Of course. We even pay a little stipend if it gets published. Although we haven't told that, I don't guess. No. It's like I asked the president, you know, we're trying to keep the expectations low, but what we really care about is the quality of classroom teaching, and we really think in this kind of institution, one's research should serve one's teaching, and that's just a commitment of ours. We're committed to the holistic nature of the individual student, and I think the upshot of that is we think this stuff outside the classroom is important and it matters. And we don't think there ought to be two environments here, the academic environment and the non-academic environment, and we think faculty ought to understand that. And we think you ought to understand. I see, I can feel myself morphing into this grouchy old administrator. If you've got an athlete in your class, for heaven's sakes, try to honor the value of that athletic experience, not see it as competitive to the classroom experience. You know, give it a chance. And you know, I mention athletics because that's this huge, time-eating preoccupation concern for athletes. And we've got it a lot with nursing in the last couple of years. First, here's how it plays out. First, our coaches who coach women's teams particularly are thrilled because they've lost lots of good athletes because they wanted to be nursing majors. They wanted to study nursing. Thrilled when they heard we were going to have nursing. Oh, we're going to have nursing. I won't now lose these girls to schools with nursing programs. Then we go to the next stage where the question is, yeah, but can these kids survive in nursing at Lee and have the commitment necessary to be good softball players? And the answer to that is, well, they can at lots of other places. That's the stage we're reaching now. Because there's been a little pushback on, well, nursing kind of crushing kids' bones, you know. So you got to make them into good nurses. We all got that. And there are high standards, we got that. And a careless or ill-prepared nurse is worse thing than a careless or ill-prepared English major. I mean, you conjugate a sentence wrong, who cares? Who's going to know? I understand that. So standards have to be high and they have to be maintained. On the other hand, can't Lee be the kind of place where we say, if you want to be a nurse and you're highly motivated and you will work hard, but your heart is in campus choir, can't we make this work? Lee's commitment is to try to make it work. And I mentioned nurses simply because there's so many of you nursing people over there, and because this really is a challenge. And I pick up the soccer, yearbook and then flip it through, and I see about 3 of them where it tells their majors, says their major is nursing, and I'm saying to myself, God help these girls. That's really what and I mean that sincerely, because I don't want to take away their dream of being nurses, but they're also
they're so amazing.
Yeah.
And they're up at 4:30. They go to practice. They show up at clinicals on time. They work hard at clinicals, and then they leave clinicals and go back to make up the half an hour practice that they missed in the morning to have to leave early to get to clinicals.
I'm so glad to hear.
Amazing.
Well, that makes my day.
They're so determined.
Yeah.
They're just.
Well, and it takes that, doesn't it?
And the softball schedule is already printed and on my desk.
Absolutely,
And we're
we've
looking
already
at it,
got
trying
it.
to figure out what
Yeah.
we can do for spring. So we're trying to work it.
Well, I mentioned women's soccer, and our women's soccer team won a spot in the national tournament last night. They were thrilled. They had a live show, the NCAA did at 6:30, and they were all in the coach's office watching this. They either got it or they didn't. Our men's team was doing the same thing. Our men's team did not get the at-large bid. We got the at-large bid. The girls were jumping around and screaming and crying and hugging necks. And what does this mean for them? Well, it means that they will, the hard work you're talking about, that means starting early this morning, they're back at it again. They just get one more weekend to try to see how good they can be. We do get lots of highly motivated, especially female athletes. But Lee's got to be the place where we say that, so where we let that work. And it works on the other end too. I had a significant disagreement with a choir director a few years ago, because she was just unwilling to bend on some particular class schedule that this girl in her choir had, and it's like, you got to either pay the price. I won't name the choir, but I mean, it's not hard to figure it out, is it? Now you get in all these gender things. I've run out of ways to express myself in a gender non-specific way. Okay, it was Ladies of Lee. This student actually got in touch with me. This wasn't a student I know. The rumor or myth is kind of like I knew all these students and their mama knew my mama or something like that. That's a bunch of bull. I don't know any of these students, and they're not connected usually. This young girl wasn't connected. She just wanted to be in this choir so bad, and some faculty member had just said no, because you miss these classes and you get dropped 2 letter grades and you're out. This was before we ever had nursing. So I called this choir director. I said, isn't there some way that we can accommodate? What had happened was, then she had been asked to miss one performance where they had to travel and be gone to miss one performance so that she could meet the needs in the classroom, and the choir director had said, no, if you miss this performance, you're out of the choir. So, it takes give on both sides. The coaches have to work with you, and you have to work with the coaches, and the same thing is true with our musical ensembles. Our musical ensembles do work hard. You can't be as good as they are without working very hard. But if a kid is willing to pay the price to do all of that, we ought to be the place that understands that, because we believe in this holistic nature of individual development. I was a Lee student a long time ago. I had a couple of brilliant teachers. I still remember them well. In some classes I worked really hard. But my life was profoundly shaped by my co-curricular and extracurricular experiences at Lee, and by those members of the faculty where I just had a glancing blow. and weren't really my main teachers. Okay, we're committed to the residential campus experience. We're determined to keep students on campus for 2 years because we think it really helps tie them in. Got a lot of unhappy kids right about now. You know, it's early November. Kids that freshmen that haven't really dug in, really created a life here yet. They're just hoping they can hang on to Christmas. They're homesick, they're lonely. But I know that most of them, you know, this whole thing of living in a dorm is stressful and it's unusual. And I know that most of them, if they'll hang in there by April, by May, they will have sort of found a rhythm here that really good, really, really good. But over and over and over again, we see that living on campus is a key to that. It's a key, not the only key. You can live off campus and have a good quality collegiate experience, but we believe in the residential environment. The residential environment has lots of problems with it. You got to manage the lives of these kids 24/7. It's a lot easier if they take 15 hours. You just own them for 15 hours, you know, and then they get in the car and they leave, and you don't really worry about it. We're not doing that. When these kids finish their 15 hours, then what do? They walk across to the rec center and hang out. And so then if the rec center is not good, they complain about that. Then they go to the dorm and they're around in the dorm. If the environment in the dorm is not positive, that's a problem. Then they look for something to do in the evening, so you wind up with all these evening experiences. Somebody has to manage these, plan these, direct these. So if you're trying to keep a kid, if you're trying to say to a kid, make this your universe, make this your home, make this your world for a couple of years and see what happens. The level of responsibility for quality and engagement really goes up. But we believe it, and we believe that it makes a huge difference. We're committed to diversity within the Lee community, all kinds of diversity. We heard about racial diversity today in Chapel in a way that I thought was very powerful. I was really moved by what this guy said. I also learned a couple of things. You know, you think at a certain point you've heard this speech so often, you know, the call for community, the call for racially diverse community. But I actually heard some things I hadn't heard before from this young man. He was very good. So they're thinking, I really want to know how to help make Lee this kind of place that he's describing. But we're not just talking about racial diversity. We're talking about many other kinds of diversity, including religious diversity, including diversity in sexual orientation. Can I say that and keep my job? I don't know. We'll see. Can we be a place that offers a traditional biblical view of sexual relationships? A view that says God is not pleased by same-sex relationships, and they're not the same as sexual relationships between a man and a woman. Can we stay true to that view and still be a place that is hospitable and embracing and caring and loving and positive for students who long before they ever got to us were struggling with this or had just self-identifying as gay, or after they get here? I mean, who are these kids? They're our kids. Well, we can't just abandon them. The world out there doesn't love them. The world out there will lie to them and abuse them and manipulate them and scorn them when they're weak. So who's going to be the place where that doesn't happen? I think it's got to be us. You know, there's no formula for doing this. There's no cookbook. This is not going to be easy. And we're not going to be trusted by people who don't understand what we're trying to do. So there's still a lot of people out there that they're willing for this to be the hill they'll die on. You slam the door shut. And if the devil sneaks in, you'd throw him out.
That was the devil, maybe.
No, I think that was the Lord. God says to one of his angels, this is a James Weldon Johnson reading, Conn's about to shoot his leg off. Stop him. How can we do that, sir? Jennifer's child could call her on her cell phone. Well, we got a lot of questions to answer here. I'm not sure how we're going to answer all of them, but we're going to try to be the Spirit of Christ in the lives of all of our students, and that's going to include students whose sexual orientation is all over the spectrum. We're committed to a relationship of reciprocal trust and cooperation with the Church of God. I'm laughing because it seems so timely that should come up right then. The Church of God, as you know, is a very tough line on this issue, LGBT issues. You know, we don't disagree with the church's view on it. There's a difference of tone. And when the Supreme Court decision came out this summer, the Church of God adopted a statement which it called on to be adopted by all of its agencies and its congregations. And we didn't decline to do that exactly. We just feel that it's important for us to develop our own statement. Because in my opinion, their statement was really hard and political. This is so far past politics. But we love the Church of God, and in all those ways, you know, it's like a family. Church of God is like a family, and you know, sometimes you're happy with your family, and sometimes you're not happy with your family, but it's always your family. And what do they say about home? Home is that place that when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Well, that's kind of like church. So we don't have, I think we have a very good relationship with the church, and it's important to us. I was surprised when I did the census of our faculty and staff how many of our faculty are still identified as Church of God members or primarily attended Church of God. So it's really quite a good percentage. I didn't do the math, but I think it'd be reassuring to a lot of people over in the Church of God who think we've largely become non-Church of God faculty. What's the eighth commitment?
Number 6.
I left out 6. And access to a wide range of students. Yeah, okay. You know what that means? Keep the price down. That's what that means. That's what that means to me. And keep giving second chance kids a second chance. Okay. That's it. Any Carolyn? I know I hate it when I do all the talking, but I don't know what else to do. And
Do you have any questions?
Said you've been doing the Ask the President for 20 years. How have the questions changed in 20 years? Not even just, you know, how they maybe got more self-serving, but just the nature of what are they asking now that's different than they were asking when you first started this?
you know, I think they're asking less about parking and dining hall, and they're certainly asking a lot less about the rules. When we started, it was so much of it about the rules. And I think maybe because we had so many more rules, or maybe I don't really know for sure. Because they still do ask a lot about food, don't they? But, I mean, they want to know why I can't swipe my card if I got a Sodexo 15 meal plan, and why I can't swipe it twice within 2 hours, and this is, that sort of question. So there's still quite a bit about, but there's a lot less about those kinds of ground level, dormitories and intramurals, and more about issues like the ones I'm describing. Here's a question. How far can a teacher go talking about LGBT issues? That was from a student. That's a good question. Actually, not theological questions, but questions about squaring the claims of the Christian faith. And I think it means students want to hear me talking about how we on the faculty do this. So I think the questions are actually somewhat more substantive. Now, this thing of asking for more stuff is something that just kind of grew as a kind of a thing, why don't we have Captain Crunch in the dining hall, and we bring out a dozen cartons of Captain Crunch. We started doing that for fun. I think that's what generated all of that. I actually think the questions are a little more serious. I honestly believe chapel is a more helpful place to our students than it was 20 years ago. I think it's hard to balance and blend what we do in chapel, but on balance, I think what they're doing over there, and this is led by Mike Hayes now, offers more substance for students, still at a level of that they will enjoy it. I mean, it can't be too substantive, because students who've been to churches all their lives where they've been entertained, and they think of church as being something where I'm going to sit here and wait for you to engage me with the music, with the smoke and the light machine, with the illustrated sermon, or with the snazzy, in whatever way there is an expectation students have coming out of churches now at the age of 18 that they're going to hook me. Let me see what they do to make it good, fun, entertaining, interesting. The old expectation, when you go to church, you sit your butt down in the seat, you sing a couple of songs, and then somebody gets up there and hammers away on some subject. That's no longer the expectation. So the threshold for getting a student's attention and being kind of positively reviewed is higher in chapel. But once you meet that threshold, I think there's more substance being delivered and received and ingested and assimilated than before, and I think it reflects in these questions. There actually are a lot of quite good questions. The operational day-to-day things, why parking, those are still there. I think our students are also gradually getting better at finding solutions to those ground level problems for themselves, and they know the best way to get Captain Crunch in the dining hall is not to wait for ask the president chapel and ask the president. So in a way, I think our students are gradually more and more resourceful in finding out how does one address day-to-day problems in a bureaucratic and institutional environment. Well, you go to the RA, and then if you don't, and then you go to the RD, and then you can also always go to the director of housing, and then you can always get up to the VP. And our students are more adept at that than they used to be, and so I think the problem solved that way more. Instead of expecting the president to wave a magic wand once or twice a year. Another question?
I have a question about the second chance students. I teach a lot of them, but from your perspective, are they, do they have restrictions, or, a lot of them just flounder and take math over and over again, or they'll wait a couple semesters and take it again and eventually drop out.
Quit,
But are they aware that they're accepted with reservations, or do we only use that term? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, we think they're aware.
Okay.
You know, the question, have they been told? The answer is yes. The question is, do they understand? The
Yeah.
question met me no. So many students who are underprepared for college are underprepared for college because they haven't been paying attention for a long time and they're still not paying attention. But how can you tell? How can you tell? So in a way, giving access to underprepared students is our faith that in the occasional find, you know, because you just can't look in the eye of that kid and know which one really now is ready to work hard and get it. And so all these stories we tell about the redemptive power of a collegiate experience after a slow start are really true, but we don't have a way to tell. It's the thing, I talked about this in the administrator retreat this year. This is one of my speech in the administrator's retreat is, you know, we can't, I used the illustration, with this will go. When I've lived in the house I'm in now since 78, so that's a long time. I can't do the math on that exactly. I was a young faculty member and we built the house where we are now, and it was one of these subdivisions that would totally been scraped clean. It was just this big barren lot. So we put a house on it, and we're putting a little shrubs around, and I went down into the front yard, and we went to the nursery, and we got 2 little trees about head high, you know, 5 or 6 feet high, with bald, burlap ball, and my kids and I, and we got pictures of it, went down in our front yard, and we planted one on one side of the driveway and one on the other side of the driveway, and these 2 trees were identical, and they came from the same nursery. They were the same size. We paid the same amount for them. They were the same type of trees. So now it's, what, 37 years later, 38 years later? I sit on my front porch frequently in a rocking chair, and I look out and I look at those 2 trees, and one is beautifully shaped, beautifully formed, taller, fuller, healthier than the other. How could I ever have known? You know, I couldn't. So it's the old thing of you can't look in the seed and, you know, see what's going to grow. They looked identical 38 years ago. I just planted them both, but because of the water or the soil or what was in that burlap ball that I couldn't see, because of things beyond my control, they've all been watered the same as far as I can tell. They've received the same rain, they, you know, received the same sun, but for some reason, one flourished more than the other. So these kids come to us, which one is going to flourish? Which one of these loser kids? These kids that they ain't no way they're going to get in bandy. Why are we taking them? So, you know, could we take the 825 freshmen we have and just cut off the bottom 10%, cut off the bottom 80 based on ACT scores, SAT scores, or any other objective criterion? Could we, and have higher achieving students, higher retention rates, higher graduation rates? Of course we could. Of course we could. Is that the smart thing to do? Of course it is. Don't your bottom 10% of your students create your, 50% of your problems? Of course. Aren't they the ones that have a hardest time paying the bills? Yes. So why do we take them? Because we don't know which ones of those in the 80 are going to flourish. All we know is every year there are some down in there that we look at 5, 10, 15, 25 years later and said, that's the life we changed. That's what I was doing it for. So in order to get those 8 or 10, we take in the 80 kids and then we let them self-select. Should we give them better student support if we let them in? All that. So of course we should. Tutoring, yes. Enhanced experiences, yes. Require them to take smaller loads and only take a certain level of courses, yes. We try to do all those things. I really believe one of the things that sets us apart is, but we do give a chance to a larger number of second chance kids.